Sometimes the most simple quilts can be the most dynamic. I've got a super easy project that you can customize for your very own state. Let's get started. I am going to walk you through some very basic steps to create the background and also build your applique today, but I want you to remember, you can make this with whatever state or image you really like to make, right? My inspiration from this whole project came when Kaffe Fassett put out its new collections of these basics. So of course I grabbed this beautiful green, blue, purple combination, right? But there's several other choices that might be better for other states based on the colors. So look at that while you're picking what you want to do. So this is what we made the applique out of. And then Timeless Treasures has these wonderful 10 by 10 squares that are really high, bright white on white. You may not even be able to see the prints. And so I chose that on purpose. I want to build a background instead of use a solid piece of fabric. One, for the patchworkness, but secondly, I want to do that for the construction elements itself. To put a giant applique on a single piece of fabric could cause a lot of stretching and warping in that single piece of fabric. So we're actually going to take our 10-inch squares, we're going to cut them down and put them right back together like all good quilters do, and that's going to build the background, and then I'm going to walk you through making your applique for your own state. So I've taken my 10-inch squares. I have between 6 and 8 of them on the table. That's based on how well you cut. And I'm going to go ahead and I've straightened them up as nice as I can. And I'm going to go ahead and make one 10 by 5 inch rectangle from all of my pieces. So that is done just like this. Okay. And then the other piece I want to take, and I'm going to make two 5 by 5 inch squares. And so I'm taking that and I'm cutting this down here. So we do that to all 40 pieces of the background fabric, right? My white on whites. And right now, of course, all 3 of these fabrics are the same. So if I just simply pull these 2 out, set them aside, pull one more aside, all 3 of these are now different. Of course, sort all of yours as you go. You can do them in multiples of 3 when you cut, and then it's an easy swap and stack process. After you have them sorted out so you have a different fabric in all 3 positions, we're going to go ahead and piece these together very simply. So I'm going to take the 2 straight lines that were cut across here, and I'm actually going to join them at the corner which has the other 2 straight cuts. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. And first what I'm doing, and for this I did these squares so quickly that I didn't even take the time to press in between steps. So I do this way, where I sew together the 2 5 by 5 squares, and then I simply grab it, and I'm going to take my 5 by 10 rectangle, and you see how I have that straight edge? That straight edge is going to go along the straight edge that I created when I cut the first piece. Starting at the top corner, I'm going to sew this down like this, with that same 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then I'll go to the iron and I'll press both seams at once. I'll show you that trick here in just a second. So we need to move these out of the way for a little bit. Here's the background I'm going to show you. And then as I come in here, what I do is I iron my 2 5 by 5s first. So I'm just going to make sure that that seam presses in one of the 2 directions. And then I'm going to go across here and I'm going to press that rectangle against the squares, just like this. And the last step I would like you to go ahead and do, once you've made all of your squares, is they should trim down to 9.5 by 9.5. If you want to take them all the way down to 9s, you can. You can just start with your square here and take off those 2 edges. So make sure they're all the same size so you can start building your background. And as I was trying to point out, I did the background construction, as you hopefully can see here. I know the white on white might be a little hard to see in the cameras, but again, I didn't want it to stand out, but I wanted you to know there was patchwork involved, and again, it's all for the construction. So when I put it back together, I also tried to make sure that my rectangles, I'm hoping you can see that's a rectangle here, matches up with my 2 squares, and then maybe a rectangle and a square on the other side. I don't have a lot of rectangle against rectangle touching, hopefully no rectangle against rectangle, so that again manages more of my construction so that it is all built And once it is all built, I know what size I can make my whole quilt top. You'll have 40 squares. You can do all kinds of different layouts, squares, rectangles, that kind of thing, based on your state. Deep breath. I don't think I've come up for oxygen yet. Now, if you look at the state behind me, you'll know it is my home state of California. And it's a big, long, and tall state. So I put together my squares here. I have 6 across, and I have 7 up the tall, I think. Excuse me, I must have 5 up tall because it finished at 55 by 65 when I was all done, the background here. So I did that mathematically so that I could create this large state. So for today, because I'm filming in my other hometown of Hamilton, Missouri, of course, for all of us, we're going to go ahead and do the state of Missouri, and I'm going to use the leftover pieces of that wonderful Kaffe Fassett fabric to show you how. Because I love to use every inch of fabric I possibly can. Now, I promised you information on construction, so let's back up a little bit. Here are those Kaffe fabrics, and what I first did is I unpacked the roll, and you can probably see, maybe better here, that it goes from purple all the way out to green. And if you look at the quilt, down in the bottom is the purple, and it goes all the way through up into the green. And as a matter of fact, right here is my center strip. So if you look very carefully, I put all of the fabrics in order as they were presented to me. Here was my turnaround piece. So I took and I omitted this strip and I saved it for later. It'll make great for a quilt label or something like that. So there's only one of those, and then I continued right back on the rotation. So those are the same, those are the same, those are the same, and out you go. You don't have to do it that way, but I wanted to manage the colors because I was thinking of the ocean and the fields and all of the stuff of California. The fabric represents the state too. So I took all 42 of those Kaffe Fassett prints and I put them in order, and they were 45 inches long when I started, and you can actually see right here is where the top of California was being cut out from. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna make ourselves an outline that we can work from for our shape. Clear off these white squares. So here's our Missouri, and in our description today, I have a really cool website that I've been using for a long time. It's Posterizer, the word poster and the word razor put together, and it's a free piece of software you can use to take any image and print it whatever size you like on your regular home printer. It doesn't use much ink because you just have these small pieces or these small lines, but if you look real carefully, here's an 8.5 by 11, and this was an 8.5 by 11, so this is just my regular home printer paper. I printed it out to the size I knew I could make because I'd already made my background. So I printed this to fit on this. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm trying to teach you how to be creative a bit in your work, but also be organized enough that you don't work yourself into a corner later. So hopefully you can see that I have actually all of my state of Missouri positioned within the strips of fabric I've sewn together, and I'm going to free cut these right now. So it's on top of a cutting mat, and I'm going to pin with some straight pins my paper template out here along this edge, because I'm going to be cutting right along the edge, and I want to try to keep my fabric itself as flat as possible, because we're going to turn this into our applique here in just a second. I'm going pretty fast just to get these corners pinned. A pin cushion of sorts, or a little weighted, or what am I trying to say? A bean bag is the word I'm looking for right now. That would be another handy thing. Okay. So it is secure. This is a great place to use your Shark Rotary Cutter here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut on the outside of this line, and I'm just going to come in here, and it doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going to turn these raw edges under before I make it into an applique. So the more gradual my curve, the easier my life will be down the road. So I'm just going to kind of soften that edge there. And then these, the straighter the line I make, the easier my life is going to be. And you can see here I'm cutting through most of the layers. If I have a little spot I miss, I just come back in, put a little more pressure in there, and that frees that up like this as we go around. Okay, so let's just finish cutting this out real quick. Doesn't take long. I want you to go slow because with the Shark Applicutter, you're holding it like a pen and your left hand is part of the work, so you don't want to roll over those fingers. I'm also cutting to the outside of the line because that's going to help me with my seam allowance a little bit. I'm not necessarily adding extra shape to my state. I'm just using what I see there. Okay, let's get some of this stuff cleared off for me because I just, you know, don't want to have all that mess everywhere. And here we go. Now, while I'm finishing this cut, let's talk about some applique methods. Because what I wanted to do for this is I just turned the raw edge under and made my life easy for when I was appliquing. But as I was doing it, I was thinking, I wonder if some of that fusible little 1/4-inch tape or a glue stick or a basting glue would have been a nice choice as well for what I was trying to do. And you'll see that here as I start sewing around this edge here in just a second. Just want to get the rest of my boot heel cut out. So I am ready for the masterful Missouri quilt here. Okay, let's get these pins out of the way. I believe that's all of them. Oh, there's one more up there. And I forgot to point out, make sure your state was in the proper orientation for your fabrics because I was cutting my fabrics right sides up. I did not transpose this because I'm not doing any fusible web. Now what we're going to do, we're going to flip this over and I'm just going to roll this edge under as I come to the sewing machine. I'm just hiding the raw edge so I can top stitch the state of Missouri to that white background. So here I come in. I'm going to try to respect about the width of the foot for my seam allowance. And I'm going to take it nice and slow. One of my tricks is I have my needle down function. So if I stop, the needle stays down. And that way I don't lose track of where I'm at. And why don't you treat yourself to practicing on one of your nice borders or your state lines. It's a straight line like I'm doing here. But I'm also sewing for your benefit and mine towards that boot heel, so you'll be able to see the curves are possible. This might have been one of those spots where a little bit of glue may have been a benefit. Now I'm approaching my curve, so I'm kind of pre-cheating the fabrics over in front of me. I'm hoping you can see that. And then with this hand over here, I'm sliding my fabric underneath slightly out of the way. You may get a little bit of pucker or ripple along that edge, and that's okay because you're going to be top stitching it down and it's not going to show, but I really still want to do as good a job as I can here. And that's why I was thinking maybe the glue would have been a nice third hand or some sort of basting element or something, but it's not necessary. Now I'm coming off of this corner, so I'm going to sew all the way off. I'm going to cut my threads because of the way that that finishes like this. And now what I can do is I can come back in with it folded up and over and kind of out of the way. I know this seems weird, but I'm going to fold this corner up here first. I often use my stiletto when doing this kind of sewing. I know this looks a little unorthodox, but nonetheless, I'm trying to teach you that not everything we do with our sewing machine is as we learned in home ec. Sometimes we have to get a little bit creative and rowdy. So it may be tough, but I'm going to take this stiletto and I'm going to roll this edge underneath, lower my presser foot, and then I'm getting that stiletto and I'm bringing it forward here, and that's going to make a beautiful sewing line, just like this. And I'm going to come to this corner here, and then I'm going to hit my caffeinated mode. Now that you know that straight lines and curves are possible, I need to show you how to get this on the background. So let me finish putting that raw edge to bed and I'll be right back. Welcome back. As you can see, I've gone ahead and stitched all the way around on the raw edges of my state of Missouri. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it over to my ironing surface, and I just want to press these edges down a little bit. And as I'm looking, I do want to point out, I did forget to tell you, your bobbin thread will intentionally show up on the top side of your project. So on the quilt behind me, I used a green thread in the bobbin for all of the sewing of the state, but on the video today, I've used a little bit of white thread so you can see. So make sure your bobbin thread matches your quilt applique, is what I'm trying to say here. And I stalled just long enough to get that pressed nice. The other thing we want to do is we want to make sure our background is awesome before we get too far down the road. This is actually the most challenging section in the entire project today, and it's not difficult. We just want to take the time to make sure that the applique goes down as nicely and as crease-free or wrinkle-free as possible. So right now, I'm just, again, giving a nice run over the top of this, which is the background to the quilt top. These are those squares and rectangles all came back together. And now what we're going to do, and we want to make sure we have a rigid surface below us, again here, is we want to begin to lay out our state. And I say rigid because I'm going to put pins through this. Okay, so for Missouri, my boot heel goes down to the bottom here. And then the next thing I start to try to do is I'm looking at my straight lines, my state borders. And I want them to be fairly centered within the project. I want them squared in the project. So I'm doing a little bit of time of visual layout. Here to the top, here to the bottom, corner, side by side, all of that. And now I'm smoothing it by hand. I don't want to use a basting spray because this could start to make a mess. So what I am going to do is I'm going to use my nice little curved safety pins. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop one dead center. And I'm actually kind of pulling the fabric taut at this moment, even more so than when I baste a quilt. Okay, so we're going to lock this down. And now what I'm really doing is just one part at a time. You see that smoothing, that repetitive patting of the quilt. And I'm going to smooth here, and I'm dropping the safety pin right near the edge. Now I'm using the safety pin because I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to machine stitch around the top of the applique before I sandwich this to becoming a quilt. So I'm treating it as if it was a real quilt top though in my technique. So I brought this down here. Now I'm going to come out to this corner. The more you secure your outer edges, the less your applique will shift. The less it shifts, the better it's going to look. A little bit of shifting or a little bit of waffling will easily be stitched out in the quilting process. I think that's where they came up with that term. It will quilt out. Let's get that little hook secured. A couple more of these pins. And the beautiful thing that you don't know about being an actor slash quilter up here is the funny things happen that you never know. While I'm trying to make sense out of this pinning, I keep poking myself. And you can't see that look on my face. I can't show you how bad it hurts when I stick myself in the finger with a pin. So if you kids are watching at home, you can kind of laugh. Every now you see me go, ooh, ooh, ooh. It's because I'm sticking myself in my finger here. I'm stalling just long enough to get the last few pins in. Okay, any of those weird corners we're going to really secure. I think that looks terrific. Okay, now what I want to do is, remember, the thread's going to really show up. So let's take a second and switch threads out. And this is a fun trick. If you don't know this trick, if you have a machine that has more of an industrial style setup, you can often tie threads together, like on a serger, and just pull them right through. And I do this because on my Baby Lock Jane, there are more little eyelets than clips to snap the thread in, so it makes it much faster if I just do it this way. We're gonna get this threaded up. Now I'm still using my feed dogs and my regular presser foot. I am not doing this free motion style. However, I could. Let's take one of these nice straight runs. Let's make it easy on ourselves, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start up here, we're gonna sew to this corner, and then we're gonna head into the boot heel right now so that we're securing as much as possible. Oh, I said that, but that's backwards. I'm coming the other way. So I'm starting from the boot heel, coming towards the corner. So I'm gonna slide this in. Again, really working against any ripples or wrinkles. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drop my sew-in foot so that my thread hopefully covers up some of that white thread. And I'm going to let the feed dogs and the machine do the work. I'm also kind of putting a little bit of pressure with my hand on the Kaffe print fabrics to secure them as they go through. And I'm just going to take it really nice and slow, and we're going to applique this state 100% all the way around to our background. We're going to stop right here because that safety pin's getting pretty dang close. Let's pull it out. We don't want to ever sew over safety pins or regular straight pins, just near them, not over them. And we're going to come. You can see I've got a much slower pace with this part of the project, and I'm really securing it with all of my fingers while I'm sewing around here. And after I do this corner, we are basically going to talk you through the rest of the machine quilting here. Corner, needle is in the down position, so I can pivot everything, and you can already see how nicely this edge is sewing down. I have no wrinkles, no ripples yet. We're just going to start feeding this through here. And I'm going to ask you just to continue on appliquing top stitch style, just like we're doing right here. But I bet you want to hear about the rest of the machine quilting in the quilt. So follow me close. We're going to start in the state itself. Now, I used a variegated green and purple thread, so it's a little hard to see. But once I had done the applique stitching you just saw me doing, then for the free motion machine quilting process, again, I started right on the edge and I quilted along the edge. And I did that on purpose because what I wanted to try to do was create like the inner valley of California and the mountain ranges, but you can't see any of it because I used a matching thread, so silly me. But what I did is I stitched around the outside free motion style, holding all of the layers in the quilt together, the backing, the batting, the quilt top. Then I cut some lines throughout California, hoping to create some mountain range and some texture for fun. It didn't show up real well. I think I over quilted it a bit. But then for fun, I bounced out into the background here and I did a very easy, what I call the circle grid or a concentric circle. I didn't want your eye to notice too much of what was going on in the background, but what was really fun about that circle grid, and I have a free motion video for you just on that motif, right, is it's a perfect one where your fabric is already gridded out. And because of the way we made our background in those rectangles and in those squares, I didn't have to do any marking, and I was able to use the patchwork itself so that I could make my arcs from one seam allowance to the next, and I could also carry over my little bits of my petal so that it becomes that wonderful all-over circle design when you're all done. That is a great anchor for your quilting, but it is not overly distracting so that your eye is able to bring you right in to your fantastic state that you can hang proudly on your wall in your home, so when all your guests come over, you can say, hey, isn't this a great quilt? And we learned it right here at Man Sewing. Thanks for being a Man Sewing fan. It's great to have you out there encouraging me to create fantastic new content. If you've missed any of the videos, we've got links for you here and here. And while you're checking those out, make sure you're subscribed. We don't want you to miss any of the action.